I once witnessed a person who was supposed to protect the law commit a barbaric act for a completely ridiculous reason. My name is Josh, and that fateful day is carved into my mind in perfect detail, even though 7 years have passed. It was a weekend afternoon, and I went to Costco to buy groceries for the upcoming week. The weekend crowd was huge and the store was bustling. While I was waiting in line at the sample cart for some sausages, I noticed a family standing right in front of me. It was a middle-aged mom and dad with their adult son, who I guessed was around 30 years old. What caught my attention was the unusual behavior of the son. He kept waving his hands, rocking his body back and forth, and spinning around with a completely blank expression. When he stopped moving, he stared intensely at a fidget spinner held by a child standing nearby. Since the line was moving slowly, I struck up a conversation with the family, choosing my words carefully to ask about him. The father responded very warmly, and the mother gently explained that their son's name was Kenneth. She told me he had severe autism and was completely nonverbal. They often brought him out to get used to crowded places instead of keeping him cooped up at home all day. Hearing that made me pause for a few seconds. I watched Kenneth as he stared at the tray of sausages with the eager, innocent excitement of a little kid. He was so lucky to have such wonderful parents. Looking at them right then, I just saw a normal family trying to enjoy a peaceful evening together. But just a few short minutes later, everything changed completely. Standing in line ahead of Kenneth's family was a tall, heavily built man holding a toddler in his arms. The man stepped up to the sample cart when it was his turn. I later found out that this man was an off-duty LAPD police officer. Suddenly, Kenneth made a quick movement toward the back of this man's head. I only saw his arms swing out, and the next thing I knew, the off-duty officer stumbled forward onto the floor. The little boy the man was holding didn't fall, but he was terrified and started crying loudly, which drew the attention of everyone nearby. At first, I thought it was just an accidental bump, which is hard to avoid in a thick crowd, but the reaction of Kenneth's parents made me realize instantly that things were much more serious. Kenneth's mother turned completely pale and started screaming apologies at the man. Meanwhile, Kenneth's father rushed toward the man, frantically explaining over and over that their son was sick and didn't understand what he was doing. But the man showed absolute indifference to what the parents were saying. With one arm still holding his child, he used his other hand to immediately pull out a concealed handgun. Before anyone could even react, the first gunshot rang out. Screams instantly followed. Then came a second shot, a third, and a rapid barrage of gunfire echoing through the entire area. The whole supermarket turned into pure chaos. Screams and crying erupted from every direction. The crowd began pushing, shoving, and trampling over one another to escape and find cover. Abandoned shopping carts were left scattered in the middle of the aisles, making the frantic escape even more brutal. I was no exception. I dove behind a display shelf at the sound of the third shot. But from my angle, I could still see Kenneth collapse onto the floor. The thing that horrified me the most was watching his parents actively shield their son with their own bodies while the bullets kept flying. They were desperately trying to protect him. Both of them were struck by the gunfire and collapsed on top of him. When the final gunshot echoed and stopped, it was replaced by the sound of weeping and desperate cries for help everywhere. I froze, unable to take my eyes off the horrific sight of Kenneth and his parents lying motionless in a pool of blood. The parents were still in a hugging position, trying to shield their son. That image is something I will never forget. In the days that followed, the news of the shooting flooded all the media outlets. The official reports stated that Kenneth had been shot multiple times from behind and died instantly at the scene. His parents were shot in the back and stomach, suffering extremely critical injuries. The father had to have a portion of his organs removed and fell into a deep coma. Many years have gone by, but I am still haunted by that brief conversation I had with Kenneth's family just minutes before the tragedy. I can still clearly picture the father's kind smile and hear the gentle voice of the mother explaining their son's condition. They just wanted to give Kenneth a normal afternoon out, like any other family. I could feel so clearly that their eyes were filled with nothing but pure love. They were completely open about sharing things about their son, without a single hint of exhaustion or bitterness. They were such a happy family. I never could have imagined that just a few minutes later, their lives would be shattered forever. My name is Olivia. This happened a few months ago when I agreed to house sit and watch a dog named Charlie for a friend who was away on business trip in rural Kentucky. The house was pretty isolated, surrounded mostly by a large lawn and a few rows of low trees. It was so quiet at night that you could barely hear anything except the sound of crickets. When I first arrived, I thought this would be a nice, relaxing couple of days, but in the end, it turned into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It all started with Charlie's dog bed. On the first night, I noticed his bed was a bit dirty after he spent the afternoon running around the yard, so I took it down to wash it. I remember very clearly that after the washing machine finished, I personally transferred it to the dryer, pushed the start button, and then led Charlie upstairs to the bedroom. However, when I went downstairs the next morning, I found the dog bed sitting soaking wet inside the washing machine, and the door was propped open. At the time, I just thought it was a little weird. I asked myself, wait, did I remember that wrong last night? I figured I was just being absent-minded, so I started the wash cycle again and didn't think much else of it. By that evening, things started to get even stranger. I had just finished making dinner and was carrying the food from the kitchen to the living room when I almost tripped. The large coffee table had been dragged out and was completely blocking the walkway. On top of that, an end table had been pushed right up against the front door, looking exactly like someone had intentionally barricaded the exit. Charlie is a small dog. There was no way he could ever push such heavy pieces of furniture. That was the moment I started to feel a real sense of dread. I went around and checked every single window and door, but everything was still locked tight from the inside. There was obviously no one in the house except me and Charlie, but I couldn't shake a horrible feeling that a pair of eyes was watching me. I took Charlie into the bedroom, locked the door behind us, and called the police. 2 officers arrived and searched around the property, but they found no signs of a break-in. Before leaving, the older officer warned me to be careful. He mentioned that the local police were currently hunting for a fugitive known as the Gnome Bandit. I felt worried, but I tried to reassure myself that everything would be fine. After all, the police had just checked the whole place. The next morning, as soon as I stepped onto the stairs, my heart dropped. Charlie's dog bed was sitting inside the washing machine yet again. This time, I knew for an absolute fact that my memory wasn't playing tricks on me. Walking into the kitchen, I found several cabinets flung open and things thrown all over the place. At this point, it was no longer a coincidence. Someone was definitely inside the house with me. I immediately called the police for the second time, but once again, they found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, and no obvious clues. One of the officers even asked if I had been under a lot of stress lately, or if I had a history of sleepwalking. To be honest, I started to question my own sanity at that point. Everything felt so incredibly real, but there was zero proof to back it up. I barely slept at all that night. I kept hearing faint scratching noises coming from the ceiling. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining things. I thought about calling my friend, but she was away on an important business trip, and I didn't want to cause her to panic. The next morning, the moment I opened the bedroom door, I nearly fainted. The entire hallway was completely blocked off by tables, chairs, and other furniture, all stacked on top of each other like a twisted maze. Charlie started barking violently. He kept staring straight up at the ceiling. Right then, I knew without a doubt that something was horribly wrong. I pulled out my phone to record everything and called the police for the third time. This time, they performed a much more thorough search. They checked the attic, the crawl spaces, and even the hollow spaces inside the walls. After nearly an hour, an officer finally discovered a small hidden crawl space concealed behind an old wooden panel in the attic. And inside that space, there was actually a person. It was a thin, filthy man with messy, matted hair and wild, bloodshot eyes. He was crouching in that dark hole, surrounded by a few empty cans of leftover food. It was the known bandit the police had been tracking down for weeks. As he was handcuffed and led downstairs, he didn't look scared at all. Instead, he stared directly into my eyes and flashed a sick, twisted smile. At the police station, he confessed that he initially started moving the furniture just to scare me into abandoning the house so he could have the hideout all to himself. But after a while, watching me panic, stress out, and second-guess myself gave him a twisted thrill. He enjoyed the hide-and-seek aspect so much that he decided to keep pushing the game further. To this day, I still can't shake the pure terror of that realization. For 3 days and 3 nights, that psychopath was living right above my head, silently watching my every move through the cracks in the ceiling, while I had absolutely no idea. My name is Tyler. This whole situation started because of my second girlfriend. She is a Lexus IS 300 that I bought when I was 22, and I took incredibly good care of her. But there was one major inconvenience. My apartment complex was completely out of parking spaces. Because of that, I was forced to park in an isolated dirt lot a few hundred yards away from my building. Since a few other people parked there too, I felt somewhat safe about it. About a week after I bought the car, my phone started getting non-stop notifications from my dash cam late at night. The alerts always said, "Unusual motion detected." Every single time it happened, I would jump out of bed and open the app to check the live feed, but I never saw anything actually suspicious. This kept happening for several nights in a row, completely ruining my sleep. I started getting really annoyed, but my car was my prized possession, so I couldn't just ignore it. One night, I even went out to the parking lot myself and sat there watching until midnight, but I still didn't see anything sketchy. Eventually, I figured the dash cam was just glitching out. I decided I would take it in to get looked at and stop stressing over it. Then, one late afternoon, I had a dinner date with my actual girlfriend. Just as I was pulling out of the parking lot to go pick her up, a man suddenly ran up to my window asking for help. After asking a few questions to confirm that this was my car, he told me that someone had sideswiped his vehicle and driven off. He asked if he could look at my dashcam footage to help find the runner. It sounded completely reasonable, and it wouldn't take much time, so I agreed. I let him step into the passenger seat so we could look at the video playback together. While I was tapping through the touchscreen, the sudden silence inside the car gave me a horrible gut feeling. I stopped what I was doing and turned to look at him. The expression on his face had completely changed. Before I even had a chance to react, he swung his arm and struck me hard on the back of my neck, knocking me out instantly. I have no idea how much time passed, but I finally woke up inside an abandoned warehouse. The place smelled heavily of mold and was covered in thick dust. While I was gritting my teeth through the pain, trying to break free from the ropes tying me up, I heard police sirens blaring outside. As it turned out, the kidnapper hadn't even had the chance to move me very far before getting busted. After I was safely rescued and brought back home, my girlfriend told me what had happened. Since I was way past our date time and my phone was going straight to voicemail, she started to panic. She opened the dashcam app to see if my car was on the move. And that was when she discovered that all the motion alerts had been backed up to her phone. My girlfriend noticed something was seriously wrong in the videos, especially the audio conversation between me and that man in the latest clip. She immediately called 911. Luckily, my phone was still in my pocket, and my location sharing feature with her was still turned on. Using the GPS signal, the police quickly tracked me down to the abandoned warehouse and rescued me just a few hours later. Hearing her story, I silently thanked myself for a tiny detail that I had completely forgotten about. Around the time I bought the car, my girlfriend had just gotten a new phone. She was complaining about how annoying it was to transfer all her data. Since I work in IT, I helped her set up a few automatic backup features. While I was at it, I also linked my car's dash cam to her phone and turned on a new feature, automatically syncing alert videos whenever she was connected to Wi-Fi. It was just a random thing I did on a whim, and I pretty much forgot about it afterward. I was incredibly lucky because that exact feature ended up saving my life. After hugging and kissing my girlfriend to thank her, I still didn't forget to quietly ask about the safety of my other girlfriend. Fortunately, the Lexus was still parked in the lot, completely untouched, without a single scratch. The guy had only wanted to knock me out and dump me into his own vehicle to drive me away. The next day, the police called to update me on the investigation. After a broader look into the case, they found out that this guy belonged to a criminal ring that set up fake scenarios targeting car owners who park in isolated spots. Those midnight dashcam alerts weren't a technical glitch at all. It was their way of scouting and evaluating their targets before making a move. If they saw a car owner was too alert or called the cops, they would move on to someone else. I had blindly become their target after being watched by them for nights without having any clue. It was a brutal lesson, and to this day, I never allow myself to ignore any unusual signs again.
My name is Joseph. Back then, I lived in Cleveland and worked a job that paid an average salary. I needed some extra cash, so I started looking for a side hustle. This is the story of my strange side job, acting as an exorcist for people who believed they were haunted by ghosts. In reality, I never believed in ghosts or demons. I wasn't a priest, and I certainly wasn't a psychic like I claimed to be in my client advertisements. I was just a guy who knew how to read people's faces and say exactly what they needed to hear to feel safe. More importantly, I knew how to set the stage to make a ceremony look real. I used a few candles, an old Bible, some memorized chants, and a very professional tone of voice. In my mind, most of my clients were just suffering from insomnia, anxiety, depression, guilt, or addiction. Sometimes it was just an obsession they created in their own heads. There were no actual monsters involved. I didn't think what I was doing was bad. I wasn't hurting anyone. I felt like I was just giving them a placebo to make them feel better. I believed that right up until the night I met a client named Ethan. It was pretty late when I got the call. A middle-aged woman was crying on the phone. She said her son, Ethan, hadn't slept for days. He was in a total panic and insisted he was being haunted by the ghost of a girl. She begged me to come to their apartment that night. I wanted to say no because of the hour, but the amount of money she offered changed my mind. Their apartment was in an old, run-down building. Ethan's mother led me into his room. She looked completely exhausted. Ethan was sitting on the bed. He was bone-thin, and his skin had a gray, sickly tint to it. His state was different from any client I had ever seen. It looked like he had been living through a nightmare, and his soul had simply withered away. Ethan told me that every night, the woman appeared closer to him. At first, she was just a blurry shadow at the end of the hallway. Slowly, she moved to the bedroom door, and then right next to his bed. He said her form became clearer every time. A distorted face, swollen eyes, dark purple bruises around her neck, and a mouth hung wide open. Even then, I figured he was just a young man suffering from delusions. I thought his mother was so blinded by love that she believed everything he said. I started setting up my equipment. I told Ethan and his mother to sit inside a circle of candles, hold hands, and close their eyes. I strictly warned them that no matter what they heard, they must not let go or open their eyes. I told them to let me handle everything. I expected to start my usual performance, but everything spiraled out of control in a matter of seconds. As I began to read verses from the Bible, my entire body suddenly jerked violently. My limbs went stiff. I felt a tingling sensation like thousands of needles stabbing me at once. I couldn't stop myself even though I was still conscious. Then, my vision went pitch black. In that darkness, 3 images appeared. I saw an old wooden table with a steaming cup of hot chocolate on it. The surface of the liquid was rippling as if someone nearby was shaking. Then, the image shifted to a filthy bedsheet being torn and gripped by violent hands. Finally, a sharp, cold light flashed. It was a silver knife, the blade reflecting the dim yellow light of an unfamiliar room. I felt my throat burning. I couldn't open my eyes or move, but I heard a shrill, raspy female voice coming out of my own mouth. I don't know how much time passed, but when I woke up, I was lying on the floor. My whole body ached as if I'd been jumped by a mob, and my throat was raw. My head throbbed like it was being hit by a hammer. The first thing I noticed was that Ethan was gone. His mother was standing in the corner of the room, her face white and her eyes wide with terror as she looked at me. I sat up and asked where Ethan went, but she couldn't answer me right away. After a moment, she told me that something had possessed me. According to her, while I was reading the Bible, my body began to twitch uncontrollably, and my head snapped back. My eyes stayed closed, but my mouth opened and screamed at Ethan in a high-pitched woman's voice, "You killed me! And you're going to die the same way!" The second those words were spoken, Ethan let out a blood-curdling scream. He started slapping his own face repeatedly, and then sprinted out of the apartment like a madman. Hearing that sent shivers down my spine. Even though I didn't want to believe it, I couldn't ignore what happened. I packed my things and left the apartment so fast that I forgot to take my payment. The next few days were normal, so I tried to tell myself it was just a bizarre fluke. But a week later, 2 detectives came to find me. They told me Ethan had taken his own life with a gun in a hotel room. Even more shocking, his mother had called the police claiming my exorcism was what drove him over the edge. I told the police the entire story very honestly. When I mentioned the hot chocolate, the torn bedsheet, and the knife, the detectives looked stunned. They told me those details matched the crime scene of a girl named Elsie perfectly. The investigation into her murder hadn't been made public yet. The scene had those exact 3 details. She had been strangled with a bedsheet, then stabbed with a knife, and there was an unfinished cup of hot chocolate on the nightstand. My body went numb as I listened to them. I didn't want to believe in the supernatural, but I couldn't deny what I had experienced. The final investigation concluded that Ethan was indeed the one who murdered Elsie. It was strange, but my fake exorcism became the key clue that helped the police solve the case. After that night, I never called myself a psychic or an exorcist again. I quit the side job that had made me so much money off the fears of others. I never experienced anything paranormal ever again. Before that night, I believed the world only consisted of what we could see with our eyes. After that night, I'm not so sure anymore. My name is Sarah. I've been living alone in my new apartment for 3 weeks now, ever since my divorce was finalized. This complex has great security, so I felt safe starting my life over as a single woman. Work hasn't been going well lately, and the stress has been crushing, which has led to a lot of restless nights. But that insomnia was exactly how I first noticed something was wrong. It started when I woke up in the middle of the night. I went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and I was shocked to find the front door unlocked. I figured I was just being scatterbrained because of the stress, so I brushed it off. Then, my sleep grew even more fitful. Every time I woke up, the door was unlocked again. It made no sense. I am a creature of habit. I always lock the door and even double-check the handle before I go to bed. At first, I kept blaming the pressure and the lack of sleep, but things took a dark turn when my small belongings started to vanish. First, it was a bottle of nail polish, then my hairbrush, then an old photo I kept in a drawer, followed by my razor, and eventually, my underwear. A thick sense of dread settled over me. This wasn't just my imagination anymore. My life was being violated. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want people to think I was becoming paranoid, but I couldn't live like this. I bought a small hidden camera and tucked it under the sofa cushions in the living room, pointing it directly at the front door. I kept my routine exactly the same. When I got home late one night, I locked the door carefully. I even stood there for a few seconds to burn the memory into my brain so I wouldn't doubt myself later. Then, I went to my room and crashed immediately from exhaustion. I don't know how much time passed, but I woke up again, right on schedule. After a few seconds of clearing my head, my heart began to race. I crept toward the living room. I looked at the front door. It was open. It wasn't wide open, just cracked enough for a person to slip through. I lunged for the hidden camera. My hands were shaking as I opened the app and rewound the footage. Everything looked normal at first. The silence of the empty room on screen felt suffocating. Then, at 3:28 a.m., the door handle turned. I held my breath as the door swung open and a shadow slipped inside. He moved with total confidence. I zoomed in on the image, my eyes glued to the screen. He was wearing a hat and dark clothes. The moment I got a good look at his face, my blood ran cold. It was the building's maintenance man. I had seen him a few times in the hallway. In the video, he walked through my apartment like he owned it. He stopped in the living room, looked around, and sat down right where the camera was hidden. My heart nearly stopped. But he didn't find it. He sat there for a few seconds, then stood up and kept walking. He headed toward the bedroom. And then, he disappeared from the frame. I panicked and called 911 immediately. My voice was trembling and I couldn't stop shaking. I told the dispatcher everything while I stared at the screen. The police arrived quickly. They searched the apartment, took my statement, and watched the video. They told me they would contact management to investigate. After the police left, I lay in bed and tried to force myself to sleep. But my mind was spiraling, haunted by the feeling that my private space had been invaded. I opened the video app one more time. Suddenly, I sat bolt upright as a detail hit me. I never saw him leave. I watched the footage over and over, watching every second. The camera angle was a bit limited, but the front door was always in view. There was no way he could have walked out without being recorded. My heart hammered against my ribs. The air in the room felt thick. I scanned my bedroom, the closet, the bathroom, my desk. Everything was silent. My breathing was heavy. I couldn't stay there for another second. I had to get out of the apartment right now. But the very moment I swung my feet off the bed to the wooden floor, I felt a warm, steady breath blow directly onto my ankle. It was a slow, rhythmic pulse of air. My entire body froze. I didn't dare move a single millimeter. The distance between me and whatever was under the bed was practically nothing. That sensation was more horrifying than watching him break in. He was right there. And he had been there the entire time I was sleeping. Not just tonight, but all those other nights too. My name is Oscar. When this story happened, I was in the 4th grade, living with my family in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania. It was so peaceful at night that you could hear every single cricket chirping outside. Not far from our neighborhood, tucked away in a dense forest, there sat an abandoned house. No one knew when it was built or how long it had been left to rot. Like any group of kids, we were fascinated by it and spent our time swapping ghost stories about the place. Some kids said they saw dim lights flickering inside at night. Others claimed they heard strange noises echoing from deep within the woods. Right before summer break that year, I teamed up with my two friends, Marcus and Michael. We decided to go on an expedition to the abandoned house. We wanted to see it with our own eyes and figure out if the rumors were actually true. We chose to go in the afternoon. The path into the woods wasn't clear, and as we went deeper, the trees got thicker and the atmosphere felt heavy. After hiking for about 20 minutes, the house finally appeared. Our first impression wasn't the typical ruin you'd expect. The house looked sturdy and surprisingly clean, as if time hadn't touched it at all. We crept closer to listen, but no sound came from inside. The front door pushed open without any effort. The inside was just as clean, but we immediately noticed a strange smell. It smelled like harsh chemicals, exactly like the scent of the dentist's offices we hated going to. We walked into a large room next to the living area. The space looked just like a medical laboratory. There were tons of medical tools, scalpels, clamps, scissors, and test tubes, neatly organized on metal tables. Shelves filled with books lined the walls. Marcus curiously pulled a book down to look at it, but he suddenly let out a scream that sent a chill down our spines. On the page he had opened, there was a graphic photo of a human body with all of its skin peeled off. Marcus begged us to leave right then, but Michael and I refused. We teased him for being a chicken over a simple picture. At the time, we just told ourselves that an eccentric doctor or medical researcher probably lived there. After we finished exploring the first floor, we noticed there were no stairs leading up. The way up had been torn down and sealed off with a heavy sheet of iron. We decided to head outside and climb the water pipes that ran up the side of the house to reach the second floor. The second floor windows were completely covered with layers of old newspapers and magazines. We peeled back a small section just big enough for us to crawl through. The air inside was suffocating. That chemical smell from downstairs was much stronger and more disgusting up here. Our flashlights swept across the hallway, which was covered in posters of models in swimsuits. But when we looked closer, our hearts dropped. Every single face in the photos had been cut out and replaced with a picture of a flayed, skinless face. Terrified, we moved quickly down the hall and into a bedroom. We all froze at the doorway. Rows of mannequins wearing underwear were standing side by side. They were all facing the door, looking like they were waiting to judge whoever walked in. For some reason, we felt more curious than scared at that moment, except for Marcus, who was still trembling, so we walked further inside. In the corner of the room, Michael found an old TV hooked up to a car battery. He turned it on, and the screen filled with static. Suddenly, a VHS player underneath started spinning on its own, as if it had been programmed to play. The image on the screen showed a room with a woman tied tightly to a chair. She was struggling frantically, and her mouth was taped shut. A man wearing medical scrubs and a surgical mask stepped into the frame. He was holding a sharp knife. The man leaned down and gripped the skin on the woman's face. Then, he pressed the blade against her forehead and began to make a long, deep cut downward. Blood immediately sprayed out, running down her face and neck. The woman struggled even harder, but he didn't stop. He grabbed the edge of the skin he had just cut and slowly began to peel it away from her face. We stared at each other, gasping for air for a split second, before we turned and bolted in total blind panic. We didn't stop running until we saw the familiar sights of our town. Marcus broke down in tears, completely unable to calm himself. We told the adults immediately, and the police were at the house in no time. Everything we learned after that came from eavesdropping on the grown-ups. Inside the house, police found evidence that many people had been murdered there over a long period of time. However, there were no clear clues pointing to the identity of the killer. No official explanation was ever fully released to the public. After that day, we were strictly forbidden from hanging out after 6 p.m. The house in the woods was cordoned off and eventually torn down to the ground. Even though nearly 20 years have passed, the memory of that house is still fresh in my mind. My friends and I still talk about it sometimes when we get together. We always wonder if the killer and the man in that horrifying video were the same person.
It all began with an invitation from a stranger. We just wanted a summer vacation full of memories, but we unknowingly stepped onto the thin line between luck and tragedy. To this day, I still don't understand how I escaped that situation. All I know is, if we had been a few minutes slower, I might not have had the chance to tell this story. The story starts with a summer vacation to London with my best friend Lizzie. We decided to treat ourselves to a trip to Europe before starting college. The first 2 days of the trip, we made the most of our time, having fun, exploring, and taking hundreds of photos. On the third day, we were strolling on Oxford Street when we met someone. He approached us and introduced himself as Adrian. Adrian was tall, with curly brown hair, blue eyes, and a smile that made my heart beat faster. His voice sounded warm and charming. Adrian talked about an amazing party that night at his friend Simon's super luxurious apartment. The address was in Mayfair, an upscale area near Hyde Park. Lizzie glanced at me with excited eyes. I was a bit hesitant, but Adrian seemed really serious and polite. Plus, we were in London, and an opportunity like this doesn't come around easily. When Adrian assured us of our safety and mentioned his friend worked in finance, living in one of London's most secure areas, we accepted Adrian's invitation. That evening, I wore a simple black dress, and Lizzie chose a striking red outfit. Before leaving, we drank vodka in our hotel room to get a little buzz. The slight dizziness from the alcohol somewhat eased my initial anxiety. We called an Uber to the address Adrian had sent. Adrian greeted us at the apartment door with a beaming smile. The elevator took us up to the 23rd floor. The hallway was completely silent. No music or laughter echoed out. When we stepped inside, the space was empty, with no sign of any other guests. When Lizzie asked, Adrian explained that we had arrived a bit early, and Simon was in the lobby picking up guests. I glanced around the apartment. It was indeed luxurious, with large glass windows offering panoramic views of London at night. But the space was too quiet and isolated. Just then, the sound of a key turning in the door echoed. Another man walked in, taller and more imposing than Adrian, with a stern face and cold eyes. Unlike Adrian, he didn't smile. Adrian introduced him as Simon, but I noticed the tension in his voice. Simon merely gave a brief nod, then walked straight to the front door. The sound of the lock clicking shut made my heart almost stop. When I asked again about the other guests, Adrian replied they would arrive soon, but his eyes were no longer warm like before. He offered to make us cocktails. He even emphasized how good they were. Simon stood silently by the door like a guard, never taking his eyes off us. Lizzie and I exchanged glances. I saw the fear in her eyes. "We don't drink. Could we just have some water?" I suggested. "Cocktails will be much better. I've prepared special glasses for you girls already." Adrian insisted, his voice a little harder. I smiled faintly, feigning agreement, then pulled out my phone, pretending to text but actually opening my emergency call app. My hand trembled as I dialed the police, then slipped the phone into my pocket without hanging up. Adrian disappeared into the kitchen. I tried to stay calm and said, "Oh, this penthouse is on the 23rd floor of 89 Kensington Gardens Square, right? What a beautiful view. Simon, you have excellent taste." Simon still stood by the door, his eyes unwavering. I gave a forced smile and turned away. Very quickly, Adrian emerged from the kitchen with 2 pink cocktails in his hands. He constantly swirled the glasses gently with a slight smile and told us to drink them, saying we'd feel more comfortable. His voice sounded more like a command than an invitation. We took the drinks. I noticed a fine white residue at the bottom of the glass that hadn't fully dissolved. Lizzie saw this too, and she looked at me with wide, horrified eyes. To buy time, I suggested we play Would You Rather. Simon reacted coldly, calling it a childish game. Lizzie, calmer than I expected, joined in and asked if we should drink the cocktails immediately or wait for the other guests. Adrian gave a forced smile, but his eyes were incredibly cold. He stared intently at Lizzie and answered, emphasizing each word, "Of course you drink the cocktails now." The feeling of dread reached its peak, and I screamed my refusal. I said we wanted to go back to our hotel. Simon spoke for the first time, his voice deep and menacing. "You two can't leave." Just then, a furious banging erupted at the door. A loud, booming male voice shouted, "Police!" "Open up!" Simon and Adrian exchanged terrified glances. The banging on the door grew louder and louder. Lizzie clutched my hand tightly, both of us trembling uncontrollably. The door burst open, and 3 police officers stormed in. Lizzie screamed with all her might, "Help us!" I pointed directly at Adrian and Simon, explaining they had forced us here, wouldn't let us leave, and had tried to make us drink something suspicious. Adrian and Simon were handcuffed and led away in silence. The test results 2 days later confirmed what we had suspected. Both cocktails contained a sedative commonly used in date rape. If we had drunk them, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Adrian admitted this wasn't the first time he'd done this. Simon was a long-time accomplice. Both received severe sentences, especially after police discovered many other previous victims. We stayed in London for a few more days, but we no longer had the same spirit of exploration. Lizzie often woke up startled in the night, and I suffered from complete insomnia. The trip, from being a beautiful memory, turned into an unforgettable nightmare. Now, whenever someone asks about my London trip, I just say it was a memorable experience. I learned that attractive appearances and sweet words can hide the darkest intentions. Some memories, no matter how much you want to forget them, will stay with you for life as a valuable lesson about trust and the instinct for survival.